Hello, Malcolm here, and welcome to Tuesday Teaching Tips, episode 257. And today we're taking a third look at the topic of why we sing. Why do we sing when we gather in our congregational gatherings? You may say, well, that's rather obvious, and Christians have been doing it for millennia, and that would be true. But are we missing something by not reflecting on the purpose of that singing? So the previous two episodes of Teaching Tips have focused on the passages in Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5, quite familiar to many as having some instruction about singing, though there isn't that much in the Bible on that particular topic specifically. In Colossians 3, we're told to let the message of Christ dwell among you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, spiritual songs, I think, better translation, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. That was 256 teaching tip, and you can go back to that if you want to have a look at that. And then Ephesians 5, the other key passage, we're told there some instructions about singing. Don't get drunk on wine, leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music in your heart to the Lord. So that's episode 255. This week, I would like to look at an even more less well-known passage, I would say, when it comes to teaching on singing. You might not even have noticed this, or you might not even have thought it was relevant. But let's see what we might dig out today from 1 Corinthians 14. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 14. And in that extraordinary chapter of that extraordinary book, of that extraordinary church and situation, we have this in verse 26. So let me read it for us. Paul says, "What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn." Get that? Each of them has a hymn. Each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. Now, you may be familiar with the fact that the church in Corinth had a number of problems Paul is addressing through the whole of the letter. They struggled with divisiveness, with looseness regarding sin, attempts to put leaders on pedestals. There was drunkenness during the communion or leading up to the communion. They had chaotic church services. And overall, the reason why we have chapter 13, the real bottom line issue is a lack of love. So as Paul gets towards the end of his letter here in chapter 14, he's focusing on helping them to rethink and to change their thinking about their church services, about their gatherings together, in the hopes that, if you read the rest of chapter 14, the hopes that God will be glorified and people who visit, unbelievers, will have, as he calls it, the secrets of their hearts laid bare. And then they would, in verse 25, fall down and worship God, exclaiming, "God is really among you." So it seems there are many issues as to why there are many challenges in Corinth, but one of the things he does talk about is their singing together. And a lot of the preaching and teaching in terms of Corinth are about the abuse of prophecy or tongue speaking and so on, and that's fine. Not much is said about the singing. And it is true we only have this one verse and just that one little phrase, each of you has a hymn. But I think it's instructional and maybe helpful for us to reflect on. I'd like to encourage us to do that, and let me know what you think. So the first thing I see here in this regard is that choosing songs for the worship was a congregational responsibility and a congregational activity. See here, Paul doesn't rebuke the Corinthians for actually speaking in tongues. He doesn't rebuke them for having a revelation or a word of instruction or an interpretation. He's not telling them it's a bad thing you've got those. He's trying to help them to use these things, these gifts, and what they have to build up the whole church, and so that it's not chaotic. That's what he's trying to do. And I think the same thing is true here of the issue of bringing a hymn. He says, each of you has a hymn. Now, what we can figure out from the rest of the letter to the Corinthians, it seems that everybody's bringing their thing they have, whether it's speaking in a tongue or prophesying or whatever, and they're just all using it with scant regard for God or for one another or for the unbelievers present. And so you've got perhaps people speaking over each other, prophesying over each other, preaching over each other. It was a pretty chaotic situation. But also people were bringing a hymn. And maybe the same thing's happening with the hymns, that people are saying, let's sing this hymn. No, let's sing that hymn. I want to sing this hymn. I'm going to start. And they start singing that particular song, and somebody else cuts in and says, no, this is the right hymn. And they start singing their hymn. Can you imagine what it'd be like if you had, I don't know, 5 people all singing different hymns at the same time? Probably not the most edifying thing. But he's not saying don't bring a hymn. It's normative in that congregation, clearly, that people would turn up with a hymn. Maybe not every member every week, but it's a common thing for each of you, he says, to bring a song or perhaps a song suggestion to the congregational service. And so it looks a bit like, I hope I'm not reading too much into this, you can tell me, it looks rather as if they didn't have what we would call a worship team, at least not in the way we understand it. Perhaps no one chose the songs for that Sunday in advance. Can you imagine a church service like that, where your worship team, your song leader, whoever it is, hasn't thought about, well, not so much hasn't thought about, has not decided in advance what we will sing. Instead, it looks like the members, perhaps during the week, they're contemplating what God has been teaching them and showing them during that week. And then they bring songs that are relevant to that, to the rest of the congregation, so they could sing them together, and perhaps learn together, as it talks about in Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3, celebrate together, perhaps commiserate together. Perhaps the hymns that they're bringing are hymns that the congregation already know, or perhaps they're hymns that they've made up. Here's a song I made up this week, or here's a song we sang in my family during one of our devotional times. We'd like to sing it with all of us together on Sunday because I think it will bless all of us. In other words, it's not just my song. I like this one, but I think this could be useful for us here in this setting. Now, we can't know the details for sure. And some of what's happening here may well be cultural, and it may not be fully appropriate to my situation or yours. But what I take from this is, and I think this is quite challenging, is that the congregation didn't delegate the responsibility for singing to musical specialists. Remember, he doesn't say each of you worship leaders has a hymn. He says each of you has a hymn. He's talking to all the members. So that's the first thing I notice here. What do you think about that? Secondly, the congregation, it seems to me, came to the gathering, their church service, thinking about songs and thinking about singing. In other words, they didn't get up, get dressed, get the kids ready, get them in the car, so to speak, drive to church, and not have a thought about the singing. The music and the singing as part of their worship was important to all the members of the congregation. It's clear that the congregation sang as a body. Each member was aware that others had something potentially they could contribute. That's why they bring a hymn. It may not be that every person brought a hymn regularly, but it's a normal part of church culture that various people would bring hymns. One week it's Peter, next week it's Mary, or perhaps Mary and Peter have both got a hymn that's appropriate. I mean, it was different people. And if they're going to do that, it means that they didn't start thinking about singing on Sunday morning. They didn't start thinking about singing as being relevant at 10:30 or 11 as they walked through the door. They were thinking about hymns during the week. How else are you going to bring a hymn unless you've already thought about it ahead of time? We're used to that with our worship leaders. And I do this, and in Watford where I am, Danny or Charles will pick the songs for a particular Sunday. I do some Sundays. I think about them during the week. But this is every member. So imagine this. Imagine if from Monday to Saturday, you gave some time to thinking about the songs that you might sing in your congregation this coming Sunday. What might happen if you took time to do that? Part of your devotional time, part of your prayer time might be, God, show me some songs, reveal some songs to me, and remind me of some songs that are relevant to what our congregation needs right now. Perhaps if we did this, it would help us to be, shall I say this frankly, more fully engaged with the singing and not depend on somebody else picking, oh, that's a great song, but what about one that you've chosen, one you think is not only a good song, but one that's appropriate and meaningful for the congregation? Would it help us to be more engaged congregationally, knowing we've all got something to bring, and regularly we all do bring something? It's an interesting thought, isn't it? And one of the ways to do that, I think, is to incorporate songs more into our personal devotional times during the week. By the way, whether by listening to songs, singing them yourself, reading the words of a song, a hymn, praying through them. And that's rather like praying through a psalm, isn't it? Similar. And I think in doing that, then we'll connect our hearts to God and find ways of expressing our love for him in song. There's a book I read called Sing, with an exclamation mark, by Keith and Kristen Getty, very famous hymn writers, songwriters. They said this. They said, worship isn't primarily about music, techniques, songs, or methodologies. It's about our hearts. It's about what and who we love more than anything. That's why I think incorporating music into our personal devotional times with God helps us not only in our relationship with him, but to engage with the songs on a Sunday as well. And if we connect our heart with God in song the rest of the week, I'm certain it'll enhance the expressions of joy when we sing together on Sunday. So those are some thoughts from this little verse here in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26. What are your thoughts on this? Let me leave you with 3 questions to reflect on. Firstly, someone once said, your voice may not be of a professional standard, but it is of a confessional standard. Your voice may not be of a professional standard, but it is of a confessional standard. In other words, you can speak, sing what you believe. What does that mean to you in terms of congregational singing? You've got a confessional voice. Are you using it? Secondly, God does care that you sing, but he doesn't care how well you sing. And how does that shape the way you think about your singing? And I'm talking about him participating in congregational singing. He does care that you sing, doesn't care how well you sing. Thirdly, something else the Gettys say in their book is Christian singing begins with the heart, not on the lips. Begins with the heart, not on the lips. What does that mean for you? Well, I hope you found this stimulating, whether you agree with it or think it's that relevant or not. But I'd be really interested to know what you think about this. I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 10th of May. This coming Sunday, the Watford Church are going to try an experiment after I've done some teaching. I have done some teaching on this the last couple of weeks. This Sunday, I'm going to preach a sermon based on 1 Samuel 3 on hearing the voice of God. I've told the congregation. And then after the sermon, I'm going to invite people to suggest songs for us to sing. It'll be interesting to see. We may not all know all the songs together. It may be a little challenging to accompany the songs. I really don't know, but I'm not that fussed about it. I think it'd be great, a wonderful thing to respond to the lesson with songs that can reinforce the message of the song. And I think that's part of what's happening in Ephesians and Colossians, is this idea that the singing sort of drives deeper into our hearts and minds, or into our spirits, the message we've heard. And that's how we can teach and admonish one another in song. We perhaps heard a message from God's word, and now there are songs that can help us to deepen our understanding and acceptance of it in some way. So that's what we're going to try on Sunday. So pray for us. I'll let you know how it goes. And if you have any thoughts on this, please do drop me a line. You can email me, malcolm@malcolmcox.org. You can leave a message anywhere you hear or see this recording. You can message me via my website, malcolmcox.org. And until the next time, I hope you have a terrific Tuesday and a wonderful week. Take care. God bless.